Welcome to another episode of Monster Monday from the Ready to Die channel. This series explores the design of a creature I have built for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. The stat block for this creature can be found over on the Monster Monday blog, as well as the Twitter and Discord, all of which are linked below. When I build these homebrew monsters, they are often inevitably linked to my world, but I try to keep their descriptions and lore fairly setting agnostic. I don't reference named characters or concepts in these write-ups. However, I'm not sure I can do that in this instance, where I have built the Herald for a god of my setting. Nevertheless, the mechanics are largely decoupled from that lore, so I hope you enjoy the design for Desolation, Herald of the Dark, illustrated by artist extraordinaire, Seth Monster. Within my setting, the world of Hitray, the gods are not referred to by name, instead they are merely called titles, as a sign of respect, and the Dark is a primordial god of terror and the void, also known as the First Fear. The Dark has a number of heralds, though Desolation is the first that I've made, an eldritch entity that specifically represents the fear of being alone, being abandoned, of just that sheer, crushing isolation. Now, fear isn't always necessarily a bad thing, but the Dark is not a good deity, even with alignments being removed. As its herald, Desolation is a fiend, but also an aberration due to some deeper lore aspects. Herald is also a trait on its own, and is naturally included in this creature's makeup. On the topic of heralds, there's a much wider range of examples in Pathfinder 1st Edition, with only 2 currently presented in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. However, all of them are level 15, so I stuck with that for Desolation as well. My vision for Desolation was always kind of a massive lurking creature, mostly because I like big monsters. This does lead to it using a high strength bonus, but that is not where its main stats are arrayed. It's actually more of a cerebral creature. Its wisdom is just as high, reflecting a powerful mind after being created by the First Fear. But even then, its charisma is higher still. This extreme charisma bonus is based on the fact that I partially designed Desolation as a spellcaster, with a wide range of innate spells that are based, at least DC-wise, on this. Its dexterity and intelligence are both at a moderate value, and it rounds out its ability scores with a low constitution. Desolation is a bit ephemeral, which we'll see as we start getting into its abilities, and that lesser constitution helps to represent this. Now, from its lore, Desolation hunts its victims, and between that and the number of eyes it has going on, it uses a high perception bonus. Naturally, it has dark vision, but it also possesses a fear scent, a specialized form of precise scent that allows it to sniff out frightening creatures. A very "it smells your fear" sort of design. As a more intelligent creature than most of the ones that I make, it has quite a range of skills, with its intimidation and occultism being at the forefront with an extreme bonus. It has a moderate survival to help it hunt down its prey, and uses low acrobatics and athletics to have them just in case it ever needs to make use of them. They are generally important skills needed to balance, escape, and do things such as climb or swim. Designing Desolation defensively was a delicate deed due to its all-in-your-head ability, which we're going to discuss before we delve into the actual numbers. This effect makes Desolation undetectable, existing somewhere that nobody else does, which plays into his theme of being alone and isolated, of not having anybody. This is a powerful ability, but it isn't absolute. Desolation can still be hit by effects generated on the material plane, making area attacks especially effective against him where players don't have to roll concealment or hidden. However, creatures that are frightened, that are subject to the domain of Desolation's master, are able to see it. Now, aside from the monster mash, I actually have ran Desolation as an encounter in one of my online campaigns, where I had 2 different maps set up for it. One for players that could see Desolation, and another for players that could not. This ended up being a lot of fun, with players trying to target and attack where they thought whatever their friend was seeing was, but not always actually being present. Finally, as a small caveat to this ability, animals can use their imprecise senses to detect Desolation, based on the classic evil detecting dog trope. Now, with all that covered, we can get back to our nefarious ne'er-do-well's numbers. It starts with a moderate armor class. The issue is more pinning down the location of Desolation rather than actually hitting this horror. Given its considerable usage of debuffs, one of which is the only way to actually see it, I could probably even make this lower. But I wanted to keep in mind that this is a herald, the top minion of a god. So there are cases where I may have allowed it to punch up a little, though even with that concept in mind, I kept its hit points low. As I said, I went for a caster roadmap with Desolation, and while that does partially influence this, it is equally informed by Desolation's all in your head. For saving throws, I already mentioned the strong mind cultivated under the first fear, which lends to an extreme bonus to its will save, letting it stand in the presence of its progenitor without its mind being crushed. On the other hand, its habitation of the fringes of existence between the ethereal and material plane has left it somewhat feeble, with a terrible fortitude save. Rounding out this trio of saves is its reflex, which simply serves as a balancing point between these two extremes, with a moderate bonus. In addition to these saves, Desolation resists mental damage, for reasons that I've already described, but it does have one weakness players may be able to exploit. Desolation is foreign to fear, meant to dish it out, but never taste it. So when it does, it is cowed, and becomes slowed 1 for as long as it remains frightened. My test subjects noted that while this effect is potent, it can be difficult to land given Desolation's will save, and this is somewhat intentional. There are also a number of ways to get around this will save. In the monster mash, the party had a Dirge of Dew barred handy, while a fighter with Intimidating Strike, or anybody critting with a fearsome weapon, are also able to inflict it quite capably. And again, the roles could always fall in favor of the party. That's something that I always try to keep in mind. With the admittance and the acknowledgement that our amoral aberration has an abundance of arcane arts, its attacks are adequate, but not quite amazing. Both of its strikes use a low bonus, but have some nice reach on them. And with all in your head meaning that enemies either can't observe it or are at least frightened 1, that is probably more than enough. I kept these sort of surprise attacks in mind when assigning low damage to its claws, which, as is often the case, come with the agile trait, and also with the moderate damage of its fangs. My test subjects also expressed worry about this, especially with jerk-ass GMs that just have the invisible creature murder the party, but if there is a GM like that, no amount of rules that I write up will protect the players. They will find a way to make others miserable. As for why Desolation itself wouldn't do that, it's simply not something this creature wants to do. It wants its victims to be afraid, to be confused and feeling alone, because it needs them that way when it offers their souls to its lord. But how exactly does Desolation make them afraid when it can't demoralize a creature unable to observe it? Well, random stranger, I'm glad you asked. Forefront at its fear-inflicting features are likely to be Desolation's wide array of spells, which use a saving throw DC and spell attack bonus in between high and extreme. It has a wide range of spells with a heavy focus on debuffing, and more importantly, making its victims frightened. This ranges from the simple fear spell, the horrific Teeth to Terror, and of course the classic Phantasmal Killer, among others. However, an important spell among this selection is Paranoia. The low-leveled single-target versions are handy, but its 6th level Paranoia might be one of the most important spells it has, letting it turn allies against each other. Due to some extremely poor rolls by the party, and some inflictions I wisely laid down beforehand, I've had critical failures against this spell both times that I've ran Desolation, causing allies to actually start attacking each other. There's more to it than that though, and to fully understand it, we have to take a look at Desolation's Despair. This is an aura, a wide-ranged area that deals about unlimited use area damage to frightened creatures that end their turn within it, using a moderate save DC. However, a secondary aspect to this is that creatures with no allies within 30 feet of them cannot reduce their fright condition below 1. This keeps them taking that damage, but able to see Desolation. While I did give this ability such a wide area to help it get this off, given the range that allies have to be away from each other, Paranoia is a particularly fantastic way to enable this, but not the only option available to Desolation. The eponymous draw into Desolation is actually meant to be a way for Desolation to afflict this effect. It allows it to target a creature and attempt to sequester them away from their teammates with a high DC will save, which is admittedly an all too common save type in this creepy critters kit. The build is a bit of a gamble, but it has a very powerful failure effect, so I had to be a little careful with it, as not only does it lay a hefty debuff on the enemy, it leaves them unable to detect their allies, or even other enemies that might be around. they suddenly become very alone, save for the terror that is Desolation. Now, this does offer a chance to get back out at the end of every round, similar to effects such as paralysis because of how potentially crippling that can be. And another balancing factor to it is that I think a success might actually be worse for Desolation than a critical success. If a character critically succeeds, they just go on their way, maybe not even sure what that was. But a character that succeeds isn't isolated from their friends, and can suddenly see Desolation, which, depending on who it targeted, might not be for the best. Now, with all these spells and its 2-action draw into Desolation, I wanted it to have something to help its action economy out. And with its low striking capability, I felt Ravage was a good and safe way to do just that. A single action, which it can only do once per round due to the Flourish trait, that allows it to make 2 strikes. This is akin to Flurry of Blows, but doesn't combine the damage and limits the strikes slightly. Overall, it's a simple little ability to help Desolation actually dole out damage, instead of overly decisively dedicating to debuffs. While I was cautious about giving Desolation too many defensive capabilities, there was no way I could miss out on a reaction such as Feast on Fear. This is a flavorful effect that is triggered by a creature taking damage from despair, giving Desolation a bit of recourse if things are going too poorly for it. Having tested the temporary HP it gains from it, the damage mitigation is pretty minor, but it definitely helped it survive longer than it otherwise would have, and helped put some more hurt on the heroes. Despite being both a high level and unique creature, that actually covers Desolation. This dastardly devil deals in dread, dragging dupes into the despair that dominates its dreary domain. I've run Desolation twice now, and had some great fun both times with it. It's definitely a creature that you need to think about using, and likely needs to inflict its own setup by plaguing players with nightmares before it makes its move. Once it does though, be careful. This creature contributed to my campaign's first PC death, and may have killed some of the test subjects in the Monster Mash, even after its defeat. I hope you all enjoyed this original idea, and that it isn't too deeply coupled to my world, that you can untangle it and use it in your own games. My players were a big push in sharing this creature, but it's a bit more invested in my setting than usual, so be sure to let me know what you think of it, as well as what other monsters you would like to see. If you want to check out the monsters I've already done, or even the stat blocks and other versions of this monster, head over to the Monster Monday blog or Twitter, which are both linked below. Thanks for watching, and have a monstrous Monday.